Hi, we've been asked along today to explain Chrysalis Thinking, principally, I think, because we're available and cheap, but also because I think that what we are doing here in terms of handling questions and identifying different question types may help you in your approach. I don't think for a second that what we're doing here is anything radical or anything entirely new. I wouldn't claim for a second that we're trying to reinvent the wheel. But what we're trying to show you is how we've approached some of the more tricky questions that the politics system, that the politics paper throws up. And yes, it does occasionally throw up some tricky questions. Let's have a look at some of those questions, perhaps. And I did say that these were tricky questions. Sometimes these manifestly are not some tricky questions. They're essentially regimented or structured questions. And it should be fairly evident to you chaps that what we're looking at here are questions that are looking for definitions or simple responses, questions that are looking for mechanics, questions that are looking for analysis and evaluation. And these very, very highly structured questions do, of course, expect a fairly structured response. And there's nothing particularly new or perhaps even particularly challenging about these questions. And our students generally are very, very happy with them. What they are less happy with are the other sets of questions that we get in the politics exam. And this is they. And funnily enough, each of these is worth 40 marks, just as the last batch of questions is worth 40 marks. And they should take, therefore, the same amount of time. But it should be evident to anybody that these are significantly more challenging. And we've struggled to try to help our students make the transition from the highly structured and regimented mechanical type questions to these more open-ended, challenging ideas. Not so much in terms of getting their head around them, they can manage that, but the question is, having done that, how do you move from very, very structured, regimented responses to a much more lyrical, if you will, response to these particular questions? And the answer we found was to go through a two-stage process. We looked at those questions, and when we looked into them in more detail, we found that in reality what they were doing was they were asking for definitions, they were asking for mechanics, and they were asking then for the evaluation and analysis. And that if you broke it down into those particular areas, then you could rebuild it into a much more ambitious grown-up essay, if you will. What we've tried to make clear is that there's a huge difference between this, which is this is sort of the pre-planning, and this, which is actually the plan. So this is a two-stage process, and we've tried to make it clear that what we've got going on is that information's coming in here in one form, and then it's going out in this form. And the brain, in this sense, acts as the chrysalis. The brain takes one batch of information, breaks it down, and then reconstructs it to create this beautiful butterfly that is fit to erupt on an unsuspecting world. So we have then a basic structure. We find that the definitions don't change radically from question to question. The mechanics don't necessarily change radically from question to question. But what does change is what you do with them, the bit that you stack on top. So for one question, it might be the balance of power between the PM and the cabinet, but that sits on this particular column. And then we can switch that and we can look at the differences between prime ministerial and presidential government. But again, that is sitting on exactly the same column. Again, we're back to the balance of power, and then finally, here's just another variation on the theme. But again, it's building on the same fundamental blocks of your definitions and your mechanics, and all we've got changing here is your analysis and evaluation. Do all of that, and with any luck, what we find is a methodical but not a mechanical approach is engendered. We have our students responding to questions in a managed and planned way that is not mechanical. It encourages the synthesis, it encourages self-expression, but there is a consistency of approach. You're going to approach it like this, you're going to break it down, you're going to try to find the various component pieces of this particular essay and then stack them up in a particular technique and create a particular structure. And if you do that, then with any luck we'll wind up with a consistency of quality coming out of the other end. And not just one wonderful idea, but a whole procession of ideas that have all emerged from the same specific chrysalis of the mind. If that's not too pretentious or portentous or just plain rubbish for you, I look forward to answering any questions that you have. You know where to find me, and I'll speak to you then.